Michael Scott was my brother. We were in foster care the majority of our lives. Mike was like the glue that keeps us together. That's what he was for us. Anytime anything needed to be handled or taken care of, he was the one to make it right and fix the problem.
Yo.
What's up, bro? Better be on form tonight. You're about to be rents.
The friends that he had as a teenager would come over and they would play cards. And it never was really for money. I think it was just like chips or candy. You know, stuff that wasn't like money related. It was all in good fun. He struggled with a lot of things in life, but he was probably in the best of spirits than he had been in a long time. Him getting his own place and him working hard to get it was like he was in a good place.
That particular night, we were on midnight shift, heading towards the latter part of the shift.
8562. Go ahead and start a medic. We have one down.
We received a call from our police dispatcher advising us that there was a serious shooting at the subway on Calvert Street. You had that initial reaction of, oh my God, who's awake at this hour? And then it's, okay, something happened. Let's get to the bottom of this. We responded out to the crime scene. When I arrived on the scene, the primary patrol officer advised us that we had one victim shot.
It was a pretty serious gunshot wound, and the medic had taken him already to the hospital. The primary officer told us that the victim was with 4 friends.
Did you guys see the shooting?
These guys were visibly shaken about what happened.
They confirm the victim is 33-year-old Michael Scott.
They stated that the victim was walking with them and Michael was gunned down. There was no real altercation that occurred.
We just got chips from the store, and this guy just got up in our faces outside.
The suspect just shot him over some words.
The witnesses then ran away from the shooter to safety.
Can you describe the man?
They gave a really decent description of the suspect. He was below average height, and he was wearing a maroon top and light-colored pants. We also learned that this suspect had a plastic shopping bag with him.
We want to see what kind of physical evidence we have on scene as far as cartridge casings, blood, DNA. We did recover some 9mm cartridge casings. So we knew at that point that the suspect had a semi-automatic handgun.
We sent him to our lab to be examined. That helps in terms of tracing the gun back.
The victim was taken into surgery at the hospital.
Right. We got word on Michael Scott.
Unfortunately, he didn't make it and died from his injuries. It's not just a shooting, it's a homicide now. It's time to go to work and do our job and try to bring justice for our victim and their family.
Detectives search for any surveillance cameras that may have captured the murder.
We looked around in the area to try to see what was open at that moment, and there was a hotel.
We were just hoping that the hotel cameras were pointing in the direction of where the incident occurred.
If we could piece it all together with the witness statements and then corroborate what they say with our video footage, that would be a crucial part of our investigations.
I explained to the manager what the situation was and that we were hoping to gather any information that we could from the hotel cameras.
What cameras do you got down here?
The cameras in the hotel were internal, so it basically captured the lobby.
You got anything covering the streets?
Unfortunately, the hotel cameras didn't capture anything.
You gotta stay positive and keep pushing forward in the case.
Excuse me, sir. Can we talk to you?
Fortunately, we did find a couple who actually heard the shots from their window.
Do you remember what time this was?
Yes. It was 4:33 a.m. I know because I checked my watch.
They didn't see anything, but they were very accurate with the actual time frame of when the gunshots occurred. We knew that we still had a lot more to do, and other locations that had plenty of surveillance cameras that we still had to go ahead and follow up with. We're just getting anxious because we gotta wait quite a few hours before some of these establishments open.
We're losing time. Someone who's brazen enough to, take someone's life over nothing, I mean, literally nothing, that person is a danger to society. You do put that pressure on yourself. This guy is out there, and we got to get him before he hurts someone else.
The toughest part of our job is giving that notification to the family, and we ended up making contact with Michael's sister.
Detective Lewis showed up at the door, and he told me who he was, and I didn't understand why he was there.
Are you Ashley Scott?
And he told me what happened, and I lost it. I was devastated. I was mad. I mean, I was mad for it more than anything because from what I was told, it didn't have to happen. My brother never caused harm to anyone. It crushed me.
I try to reassure the family that, we're gonna do our very best to try to find out who did this. It finally came time for us to start following up with some of these establishments that were opening up.
We would hopefully get a break. I'm a very optimistic person by nature, and because of the location with all of the cameras, I just had a good feeling about this case.
Detectives find a men's store next to the crime scene.
The Quintessential Gentleman sits one store north of the subway on Calvert Street. I was really hoping that because it happened right there, that the incident was going to be captured on camera.
We'll want the exterior-facing cameras.
There was a camera inside the lobby that pointed at the door.
Investigators cue the footage to just before 4:33 a.m., the time of the shooting.
We were anxious and hopeful that this would be the money shot for our case, where it would capture everything, the whole incident go down.
Can you play it again from the top?
The thing that shocked me was how loud the gunshots were, and then quickly seeing someone running by.
Is that the perp?
There were approximately 4 gunshots that we heard, and then, you see the legs and the feet.
Can you zoom in?
You actually see 2 persons running north.
Freeze it there.
They all had on dark-colored pants. A suspect had on tan pants. It wasn't our guy at that moment, unfortunately.
It was clear to us that these were the witnesses of the incident and not the suspect.
It was a disappointment, but I knew we still had a lot more to review.
Eric and I must have played that back 20, 30 times just to see if we could capture anything more significant than that.
We were able to ascertain that Michael's friends ran north, running away from the suspect, so we just started looking for our suspect south. We knew we were on this guy's heels. We've got to get in the right angle, and we've got to get a good shot of his face. We still got to get him identified. We know he went south, so now we're armed with that information. We try to look for and obtain any type of footage that might be available to us via commercial business, residential, housing, anything we can get to try to bring it all together.
A variety of cameras line Pratt Street, south of the crime scene. Detectives obtain footage from the Pratt Street cameras and pull up the camera closest to the scene of the shooting. It's from a business on the corner of Pratt and Calvert.
Downtown Baltimore at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, there's no one on the street. So finding someone and then having the description of that someone made it a little bit easier.
Is it him? Can you zoom in?
He is walking as if everything is normal, which gives us a good look at what he's wearing and what he's carrying. We see the suspect dressed in the maroon top and the tan pants. Also seeing the white bag that he's carrying, which really stands out.
Pause it.
This is what we were told this guy looked like. So yes, we're excited now. In my mind, there was no doubt this was our guy. It's an adrenaline high. It truly is to watch this suspect after shooting someone and watching his movements. He just casually walked away as if nothing happened at all. My thought was, okay, we got him, let's track him. We're watching where he's going. And yes, we are very curious. If we could watch him walk into his house from downtown, that would be great.
Bring up the next camera.
The next main camera was the Baltimore Convention Center, which has cameras all around its property.
Its cameras only capture one frame every 3 seconds.
Nothing's gonna be perfect. You have some video surveillance footage systems that are better than others. But we were able to spot the white bag right away.
I can remember thinking, just show me your face once. Just show me your face, come on, just show me your face.
But the suspect doesn't turn around.
What other angles do we got?
I was just hoping for the best frontal view shot of his face.
Is he making a call?
He was on his phone, and that could be a ruse to make it look like he's relaxed, having a conversation with somebody. That's just something that a lot of criminals do just to try to blend in and look normal.
Can you zoom in on his face?
Unfortunately, this footage couldn't give us a good ID, couldn't identify our suspect.
There was some frustration on my part. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to see who this guy was.
Investigators pull up one of Baltimore's City Watch cameras, a network of over 700 cameras lining the city's streets.
The white bag was very visible, very distinctive. We definitely knew we were on the right track, and we definitely had our guy for sure.
Can you zoom in?
You could tell he was walking very briskly. He was on a mission to get somewhere fast, or get away from somewhere fast.
Switch cameras. Where is he gone?
We lose him. We're kind of wondering, where could he have gone?
He's out of camera view. Nobody's gonna vanish, right? We had to keep moving forward, to keep trying.
I think I know where he's gone.
There's a bus stop on the corner of Howard and Pratt Street.
It's right in the blind spot between the last two cameras.
I think there's only one answer. He had to get on the bus.
The MTA buses here in Maryland have cameras all around them, interior and exterior.
If the suspect boarded the bus, its cameras may have captured a clear shot of his face. This early in the morning, there are only a few bus lines running that route.
We had him near the bus stop about 4:55 a.m.
We gave the location, we gave the time, and the detective that was working for the MTA police said, oh yeah, we can pull that up.
The MTA technician pulls up footage from a bus crossing the corner of Howard and Pratt Street around the same time.
We get our first clip from a front exterior camera which shows the bus approaching an actual bus stop.
There he is.
We see him walking towards the bus stop. I said out loud, that's him.
All the MTA buses have multiple high-def cameras, exterior and interior. So at this point, we're feeling very confident that we're gonna be able to get him identified if he gets on the bus.
Oh my God, get on the bus. Just get on the bus.
Can we switch to the interior cameras?
Play that again.
I remember thinking, I can't have this kind of luck. I never had this kind of luck.
Zoom in.
He used his pass, and you get 3/4 of his face. At that point, I remember going, got him. The fact that you could see his face, it was almost like a prayer was being answered.
That moment, that was a definite game changer. We were confident that we were going to be able to get him identified.
What's the next view?
From there, we switched the angle to where he's walking to his seat, and he sits down.
Play that again. Freeze it.
When I watched him walking onto the bus to go to his seat, he was nowhere near the ceiling of the bus.
Detectives determine he can't be much more than 5 feet tall.
That gave me a clear indication that he was below average height, consistent with the statements that were given to us earlier. We knew that this was the person that we needed to identify as soon as possible. The facial shot, it's not the full frontal view, but it's 3/4 of his face.
Okay, grab that. We'll distribute it.
It's such a fantastic feeling. We finally got him here with this one. The case definitely cracked open at that point.
I believed it was going to be just a matter of time to identify this person. I was very confident at that point. We put out a flyer on our board to see if anybody recognizes this person. At that time, no one from the unit recognized this guy. So we tried facial recognition. We could hook up with the Motor Vehicles Association. If someone has a Maryland identification card or a driver's license, we may be able to match up that photograph with our still. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough of his face to get any positive results. It was very disappointing. But I still felt like, okay, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. We'll put it out to the news. We'll say, hey, look at this guy. This guy is wanted for questioning. Does anybody know this guy? If you know this guy, just tell us who he is.
Detectives are investigating a homicide that occurred on April 24th, 2017 in the unit block of South Calvert Street.
I thought that this would go unsolved and no tips would come in for years. I watch the crime shows and all of that, and sometimes they don't have an ending. To get my hopes up and it doesn't turn out to be something is letting myself down. And I felt as though my brother would fall through the cracks just like anybody else.
As the lead investigator, I need to try to find the person that did this and try to give the family some relief and some justice in knowing that this person was taken off the street.
My brother wanted to be cremated. He said, if you cremate me, you can spread my ashes, then I can go wherever the wind blows. When we did scatter those ashes, I wouldn't say that it was a goodbye, but it was a release. It gives you a little bit more strength to keep going.
We got a few tips that came in, but none of them proved to be fruitful to the investigation. It's a waiting game now. Just hopefully something comes in soon.
Detective Lewis here. How can I help?
We do get a tip, and we look into it. They say, I know the guy, and he lives up the street.
Got a name.
There's not many decent, law-abiding citizens that just go around shooting people at random for no reason. There's definitely a good chance that he's gonna be in our system with a record. We were anxious and hopeful that this would be the golden ticket we needed to start identifying this guy.
Unfortunately, I didn't get the result that I wanted. We realized that he is 6'4" and a dark-skinned African-American male. It's like, okay, this isn't the person. There's no way he grew a foot. I was absolutely frustrated that we weren't getting the information that I hoped for. As the days went by and the weeks went by, it did get frustrating. You say to yourself, okay, what else can I do? There's got to be something that I've missed. Given how brazen this was in shooting someone for no reason, I was always concerned that this person may do it again.
Hold the air for a second. I'm being advised that on the Edmondson Shopping Center there was just an armed robbery and possibly a shooting in the Family Dollar. Just hold the air. I'm going to enter with my partner.
On the particular night of this incident, I was working the midnight shift.
Detective Rashid speaking.
We received a call approximately 10 p.m. indicating that there was a serious shooting at the location of 4500 Emerson Avenue, which was a Dollar General. The information relayed that an individual had been shot and had been transported to the hospital.
Okay, I'm heading to assist.
So we headed up to 4500 block Emerson Avenue. When I first arrived, I meet with the patrol officers that actually responded to the scene initially and gather all of the information that they've obtained prior to my arrival.
Have we got an ID?
The victim was Derek Ford. He was working as a manager at this particular store. He was behind the register. My gut feeling was immediately that it was a robbery that may have gone bad. I was still on the crime scene when I was notified that the victim had passed away from his injuries. After everything was cleaned up, we did find a 9mm projectile. The bullet had entered the victim's body and exited. As soon as I saw that there were cameras fixed throughout the actual business, I got excited.
Can I see this camera?
It was pretty much all hands on deck.
The call was about 10 p.m., so let's queue up to shortly before that.
The shop has multiple cameras situated on the business premises.
This particular location had surveillance footage that allowed you to view the exterior front door.
Rewind. Zoom in.
I was able to see a shorter male actually enter the store wearing this distinctive colored hat.
No one else enters the store, so detectives turn to the interior cameras to track the man's movements.
Show it to me again.
I was able to see him walk through the aisles as if he was looking to purchase something.
Detectives try to pick up the man on a camera overlooking the checkout.
Pause there. That's the victim. Switch back to the exterior camera.
Detectives track Derek Ford's movements back to the camera facing the store's entrance.
Stop. Show it to me again.
And at this time, Derek Ford is actually in the process of locking the door. The suspect kind of steps his foot in the door, and he's playing with his cell phone.
Rewind.
At that point, you see a second individual wearing a mask.
Can we follow them inside? Show that again.
At that point, the suspect wearing this distinctive colored hat brandishes a handgun and puts Derek Ford at gunpoint.
Stop. Zoom in.
This footage was a bit grainy, so I wasn't able to definitively identify who he was.
Investigators switch to the cash desk cameras.
Seeing the way the crime actually unfolded was definitely tough to watch. The next thing you immediately see is him pretty much force Derek Ford to every register at gunpoint as he's opening up each register drawer. You see this same suspect remove the money. The second individual wearing a mask, he's out of camera view.
The man in the hat then shoots Derek Ford out of camera range.
Derek Ford was completely compliant throughout this entire incident. And for him to be murdered essentially for nothing when he complied with their every demand, it was disgusting to watch.
The killer and his accomplice are captured on surveillance, running to the rear entrance of the store and out of camera range.
The second individual, he wore a face mask. There was never a chance to actually get a full face shot of the second individual.
Show me the shooter arriving.
The suspect was a really short guy. I estimated his height to be about 5'4". We knew we had this guy's face on video, but because of the quality of the footage, we just could not get a clear picture of it. I kept trying to slow the footage down and speed it back up, trying to get the best image I could possibly get. It was just really, really frustrating that the camera's quality wasn't what it could have been.
Keep playing.
I remember looking at the video footage and waiting for a time that he actually looked up to get the best image possible. And at one particular point, he looked straight up at the camera. And I said, "There you are." And I knew exactly who I was going to go after. I was actually preparing to release a still image to the media. It is my duty to track down the persons responsible for taking a life. It definitely put weight on my shoulders to bring this killer to justice.
Take a look at this. Do you recognize the suspect from any of your robbery cases?
After speaking with the detectives that actually worked that area, there was nothing that actually matched the description of these two individuals.
Before Detective Rashid takes the investigation any further, he needs to break the news to Derek Ford's family.
I was home when I heard the news.
Erwin Schofield? I have some really bad news.
He said my dad was shot and he was killed. And I don't know, I sunk and just broke down and just said, no, like, don't say that, don't tell me that. Like, I'm not ready to hear that. So it was crushing to me.
54-year-old Derek Ford leaves behind 12 children and 38 grandchildren.
People loved him. He didn't deserve that. He was just this great man, always positive, like, he just didn't deserve it.
We actually got a tip from Metro Crime Stoppers.
Thanks.
This particular tip stood out to me. It included the suspect's height. The individual went by the name of Michael Thompson.
Let's get him in. But don't tell him he's a suspect.
We can't just make an arrest solely on a tip that we received. I didn't have enough evidence with what I had, so we would play it as if we were interviewing him because he was a witness. And immediately, when I looked at him, I said, this is the guy. I know that everything's riding on this interview. If I didn't get that confession, he was walking out the door. I needed him to just say he was there. The video would tell the rest of the story without him. And I did that by telling him that the interior cameras were not functional. That definitely softened him up.
Tuesday night, I was there. Tuesday night. So I'm not getting involved. Like, the fuck, they weren't after me. So you were trying to hide from the guys that went in there, right? So you were in there when they came in there? Yeah.
He continued to say that he had went to the store to make a purchase. He was there when this incident took place, and he just left after it happened. So at that point, I decided to just disclose to them that we did, in fact, have the interior cameras that captured everything.
I know what went on in that store because you know I saw the video, right? So let's get past the that you just went in there and you know, you saw these people. You were one of those people. I know that. I'm not asking you. I know it. Okay, I know it. It's not what I'm asking. It's what I saw. Tapes don't lie. But what did this man do to you? No. That's what I don't understand.
Michael Thompson tells Detective Rashid he was reacting to a tragedy in his personal life.
I wasn't in the right state of mind. I robbed him. I shot him in the back of the head. I killed him.
When he finally said, okay, it was me, I said, gotcha, in my head. So that was huge. He was hurt, and he wanted someone else to feel his pain.
Detectives press Michael Thompson on who his masked accomplice is.
Did you know that other guy who was coming up?
It was definitely frustrating. I wasn't getting any more from him. But at this particular moment, he gives me the shock of my career.
Back in April 24th, 4:35 in the morning. I shot and killed a man on Lombard and Calvert by the subway shop. It was on the news. They called me getting on the bus. Okay. So I'm gonna confess to that one too. So
he actually shares with me that he has committed a second murder as well.
The guy that was shot, you know? I think his name was Michael. So that's double homicide.
I'm blown away that this guy just confessed to a second murder that I knew nothing about. In my 22 years of being a police officer, I'd never been more shocked in my life.
Brian, you're not gonna believe this.
It was a mixture of emotions. It was excitement, it was disbelief. To actually see him in the room, I said, that's the guy, we got him. It was pretty exciting, but I would like to know the motive.
5 guys walked by, said something to me. I got mad, I followed them, shot him on the corner of Lombard and Calvert in front of the subway shop. I ran up the street, got on the number 35 bus.
Hearing his why was very disappointing.
The suspect was very cold and callous when asked why. Very nonchalant, as a matter of fact, kind of attitude. Really didn't care.
We were able to recover the weapon he actually had in his locker where he worked. A lab report from our firearms unit indicated that the shell casings from Detective Rashid's case and the shell casings from my case matched, indicating that that was the same weapon that was used for both murders.
Michael Thompson pleads guilty to the murders of Michael Scott and Derek Ford. He's sentenced to life with all but 60 years suspended and 5 years probation. The masked individual in the shooting of Derek Ford has never been identified. The police search to find him is ongoing.
In this case, surveillance footage was a huge piece of the puzzle.
The cameras were incredible. I don't think since that case I've had a case like it where I was able to track someone for blocks that ultimately led to the person's identity.
If it wasn't for us piecing together all this surveillance camera footage, who knows how many other people he would have killed.
My dad, he was a committed man, very devoted to his family. My dad's legacy is huge, and because of our big family, like it lives on. He really brought a lot of the family together. Like he was the centerpiece of that. Gone too soon, of course, but yeah, he have a big, great legacy. I want to make sure I try to represent, who he was and who he is, and what he instilled in me, and all his, sons and daughters.
It's been 6 years, and it doesn't get any easier, but it does get less painful. Ever since he's been gone, we get together and do those things that he loved to do, which were eating crab legs and shrimp on the weekends. We'll come together once a year, whether it be the anniversary of his death or his birthday, and we try to do something to honor him in some shape or form. He might not be here, but we got memories we can reflect on.
On the island of Hawaii, where vast stretches of volcanic land meet dense pockets of forest and winding rural roads, there are places where silence feels heavier than sound. In those places, distance is not measured only in miles, but in how long it takes for help to arrive, for a voice to be heard, for a life to be saved. It is in one of these quiet stretches, in the area known as Puna on the Big Island, that a single moment on December 24th, 1991 would become the center of a case that would stretch across decades and resist every simple explanation. On that afternoon, Dana Ireland, a 23-year-old woman from Virginia, was riding her bicycle through this remote part of the island. She was not a local resident trying to navigate familiar roads, but a visitor in a place known for its isolation as much as its beauty. The roads in Puna are surrounded by natural landscape and long distances between populated areas. For someone traveling alone on a bicycle, the environment offers both quiet and vulnerability in equal measure. Dana Ireland had come to Hawaii to visit relatives and to spend time in a setting far removed from her everyday life. It was Christmas Eve, a day when many routines slow down, when people gather with family, and when roads in rural areas can feel even emptier than usual. In this environment, she continued her ride along a roadway that would later become central to one of the most heavily examined criminal investigations in the state's history. What happened next would be reconstructed only through fragments, physical evidence, and the devastating condition in which she was eventually discovered. At some point during her ride, Dana Ireland was struck by a vehicle with significant force. The impact was severe enough to leave her bicycle heavily damaged, scattering debris across the scene. Evidence later documented at the location included broken parts of the bicycle, fragments consistent with a motor vehicle, and tire impressions on the ground. The scene itself reflected violence, confusion, and abrupt disruption of what had been an ordinary moment moments earlier. But the collision, as catastrophic as it was, did not mark the end of what occurred that day. Instead, it became the beginning of an even more disturbing sequence. Rather than the incident being reported or emergency assistance being called immediately, the situation escalated away from the roadway. Dana Ireland was taken from the initial site into a more remote, wooded area nearby. The terrain in this region is dense in places, with natural cover that can obscure visibility and isolate activity from the main road. In that secluded area, she was subjected to a violent assault. The injuries she sustained were extensive and severe, including broken bones and internal trauma. The medical findings later confirmed the seriousness of her condition, and the evidence at the scene indicated that she had also suffered a sexual assault. The combination of physical injuries suggested a prolonged and brutal attack rather than a single moment of impact. She was left critically injured in an environment far from immediate help. Eventually, Dana Ireland was discovered the following morning. By the time she was located, her condition was already critical. Emergency responders transported her for medical care, but despite intervention, her injuries proved too severe. She did not survive. Her death transformed what had initially appeared to be a traffic-related incident into a homicide investigation of the highest urgency. The location where she was found and the earlier crash site presented investigators with a complex and deeply disturbed scene. Her bicycle lay damaged, indicating a violent collision. Nearby, physical traces of a vehicle were present, including tire marks and scattered fragments. Yet the evidence was not orderly or clear in its presentation. The scene had been disrupted, making it difficult to determine a straightforward sequence of events. What remained were physical indicators of violence without an immediately coherent narrative to connect them. From the beginning, investigators faced a challenge that would define the case for years to come: the lack of clarity in reconstructing exactly what had happened in those critical moments. The environment itself, remote and exposed to natural elements, complicated the preservation and interpretation of evidence. In addition, the transformation of the scene from roadway to wooded area introduced uncertainty about timing, movement, and sequence. As news of the incident spread across the island, the case quickly gained attention. The death of a young visitor under such circumstances raised immediate concern, not only because of the brutality involved but also because of the unanswered questions surrounding it. How did a bicycle ride on a rural road end in such violence? Why was she taken away from the roadway after the initial impact? And who was responsible for the actions that followed? In the absence of immediate answers, speculation began to emerge in multiple directions. Early investigative theories considered whether the incident could have begun as a traffic accident that escalated into something more serious. Another possibility considered was that the attack had been intentional from the outset. There were also broader considerations about whether local individuals or groups familiar with the area might have been involved. Each of these possibilities reflected an attempt to impose structure on a situation that remained, at its core, fragmented and unclear. However, despite early investigative efforts, the case did not quickly yield definitive leads. One of the most significant obstacles was the limited availability of forensic technology at the time. In the early 1990s, DNA analysis was not yet the powerful investigative tool it would later become. As a result, physical evidence collected from the scene could not immediately be matched to any known individuals. This limitation left investigators with a large amount of physical information but without the technological means to fully interpret it. As time passed, the initial urgency of the case remained, but the pace of progress slowed. Without clear suspects identified in the early stages, the investigation faced periods of stagnation. The evidence remained preserved, but unresolved. The questions surrounding Dana Ireland's final moments continued to persist without resolution, becoming a burden not only for investigators, but also for the community that had been confronted with such a violent and unresolved loss. What makes this case particularly enduring is the contrast between its clarity in outcome and its ambiguity in explanation. It is known that Dana Ireland suffered a fatal sequence of events beginning with a vehicle impact and ending in a secluded area nearby. It is also known that she sustained severe injuries consistent with both trauma and assault. Yet the pathway between these points, the precise sequence of decisions, actions, and intentions, remained uncertain for a long period. This uncertainty is where the case begins to take on its lasting weight. Because in the absence of a clear narrative, the physical evidence alone cannot fully answer the human questions that arise. It cannot explain intention. It cannot clarify responsibility. It cannot restore the missing context that would allow a complete reconstruction of events. Instead, it leaves a gap that demands further investigation, interpretation, and eventually, technological advancement. In the years that followed, this gap would become the defining feature of the case's evolution. But at the moment of discovery, none of that future trajectory was yet visible. What existed instead was a scene of destruction on a remote road in Pune. A young woman's life abruptly ended, and a series of unanswered questions that would linger long after the physical evidence had been collected. And so the case began not with certainty, but with fragmentation. Not with clarity, but with a landscape of incomplete information. A bicycle on the road, a vehicle's trace in the soil, a wooded area nearby, and a timeline that refused to align into a single, coherent story. The question that remained, and that would drive everything that followed, was simple in form but difficult in answer. What truly happened to Dana Ireland on that road on Christmas Eve, 1991? Dana Ireland's story does not begin with violence. It begins with movement, with travel, with the ordinary vulnerability of being in a place far from home. She was 23 years old, from Virginia, and like many young adults in that stage of life, her world was still forming its shape through experiences, relationships, and places she had not yet fully known. Hawaii, for her, was not a permanent setting but a temporary horizon, a place she visited to spend time with relatives and to step briefly outside the structure of her everyday life. To understand the weight of what happened to her, it is necessary to understand the contrast between her presence in Hawaii and the environment she moved through. The Big Island is often described through its natural beauty, its volcanic landscapes, its quiet roads, and its rural expanses. But that same geography also creates long stretches where human presence is sparse and where isolation is not just a feeling but a physical condition. In areas like Puna, roads can extend through dense vegetation and open land with few interruptions, few witnesses, and limited immediate access to assistance. Dana Ireland was riding her bicycle through one of those stretches on December 24, 1991. It was Christmas Eve, a day that often alters the rhythm of places, even those that are already quiet. In rural regions, that quiet can deepen. Fewer vehicles travel the roads, fewer people are present outdoors, and the sense of distance becomes more pronounced. For someone traveling alone by bicycle, this environment offers both stillness and exposure. There is freedom in the openness, but also a lack of immediate support should something go wrong. Her presence in this landscape was not unusual in itself. People cycle through rural roads for exercise, for transport, or simply for the experience of being in nature. But in cases where something unexpected occurs, the same features that make such environments appealing can also make them dangerous. Distance becomes delay. Isolation becomes silence. And when something interrupts the normal flow of movement, the absence of nearby observers can leave very little to reconstruct what follows. What is known about Dana Ireland's final ride is limited to its endpoint and the evidence that remained afterward. At some point during her journey through the Puna area, she was struck by a vehicle. The force of the impact was severe enough to damage her bicycle significantly, scattering fragments across the area. The physical remnants documented later included broken parts of the bicycle and traces consistent with the motor vehicle's presence. Tire impressions were observed, suggesting the movement of a vehicle through the immediate vicinity of the collision. However, the presence of these elements did not immediately create clarity. Instead, they formed a fragmented picture. The collision itself marked a critical moment, but it did not explain what followed. In many traffic-related incidents, a collision leads to immediate reporting, assistance, and documentation. In this case, that expected sequence did not occur in a straightforward manner. The absence of a simple reporting structure became one of the first indicators that the situation had moved beyond an ordinary accident. What followed after the collision is reconstructed through later findings rather than direct observation. Dana Ireland was moved from the initial impact site into a more secluded, wooded area nearby. The terrain in that region is not uniform. It contains patches of dense vegetation, uneven ground, and natural cover that can obscure visibility. Movement within such an environment, especially under distressing conditions, is difficult to observe from the surrounding roads. In that secluded space, she was subjected to a violent assault. The injuries documented later indicated multiple forms of trauma, including broken bones and internal injuries consistent with severe physical force. Medical findings also confirmed that she had suffered a sexual assault. These combined injuries pointed to a sustained and brutal attack rather than a brief or isolated incident. The nature of the trauma suggested that the violence extended beyond the initial collision and continued afterward in a different setting. Eventually, Dana Ireland was discovered the following morning. By that time, her condition was critical. Emergency responders transported her for medical treatment, but despite their efforts, her injuries were too severe for survival. Her death marked the transformation of the case from a serious injury incident into a homicide investigation. The discovery of her body and the surrounding scene provided investigators with physical evidence, but not with immediate answers. Her bicycle, found damaged, indicated the force of the initial impact. Nearby traces of a vehicle, including tire marks and fragments, suggested involvement beyond a single moment of collision. Yet the arrangement of evidence did not present a clear sequence. Instead, it appeared disrupted, as though the scene had been altered or affected by movement after the initial event. This lack of clarity extended into the broader investigation. The rural setting meant that there were limited potential witnesses. The time of day and the holiday period further reduced the likelihood of immediate observation from others. In such environments, investigators often rely heavily on physical evidence, environmental reconstruction, and forensic interpretation. But in the early stages of this case, the tools available were limited by the technological standards of the time. In the early 1990s, forensic science had not yet reached the level of sensitivity and precision that would later become standard in criminal investigations. DNA analysis existed, but was not widely accessible or as powerful as it would later become. This limitation meant that although physical evidence was collected, its interpretive value was constrained. Investigators could document what was present, but not always connect it definitively to individuals or reconstruct events with high certainty. As a result, the early investigation into Dana Ireland's death was shaped by uncertainty. Several possibilities were considered in attempting to understand the sequence of events. One theory was that the incident began as a traffic accident in which a vehicle struck a cyclist and the situation escalated afterward. Another possibility was that the collision itself was part of a deliberate act that led directly into further violence. A third line of consideration involved the potential involvement of individuals familiar with the local area, including groups of young men. Each of these possibilities reflected an attempt to impose structure on a scene that resisted easy interpretation. The evidence at the time did not clearly confirm any single narrative. Instead, it supported multiple interpretations depending on how individual elements were weighted or understood. This ambiguity made it difficult to narrow the investigative focus in the early stages. Over time, the investigation entered a period of stagnation. Without definitive forensic breakthroughs or clearly identified suspects, progress slowed. The evidence remained preserved, but its meaning remained unresolved. For investigators, the case became one that existed in a state of suspended attention, neither closed nor actively advancing. For the community, however, the absence of resolution created a different kind of persistence. The case remained present in memory, in conversation, and in the broader awareness of a violent event that had not been fully explained. The fact that Dana Ireland was a visitor added another layer to the emotional impact, as her death was not only a local tragedy, but also the loss of someone who had come from elsewhere and whose time in Hawaii ended in violence. The physical environment itself continued to play a role in how the case was understood. The isolation of Puna, the rural roadways, and the limited visibility of the area contributed to the difficulty of reconstructing events. In such environments, even small gaps in information can expand into larger uncertainties because there are fewer external points of reference to confirm or challenge interpretations. As investigators worked with what they had, the case gradually became defined not by what was known, but by what remained unknown. The absence of witnesses, the limitations of forensic technology, and the fragmented condition of the scene combined to create a situation in which certainty was difficult to achieve. Each piece of evidence existed, but the relationships between them were not fully established. This stage of the case is often where many investigations either move toward resolution or fade into obscurity. In the case of Dana Ireland, it did neither. Instead, it remained active in documentation but inactive in progress, waiting for a development that could reframe the available evidence in a meaningful way. What makes this period particularly significant is that it highlights the fragile balance between evidence and interpretation. The physical facts of the case did not change. The bicycle remained damaged. The injuries remained documented. The location remained the same. But without a clear narrative to connect these elements, their meaning remained open. It is within this space of uncertainty that the case continued to exist for years. Not as a closed chapter, but as an unresolved structure of facts waiting for a method capable of bringing them into alignment. And it is from this point of suspended investigation that the next phase of the case would eventually emerge, driven by changes in forensic science that were not yet available at the time of the original inquiry. On the afternoon of December 24, 1991, the road through Pune on the Big Island carried very little traffic. It was Christmas Eve, and the rural landscape was marked by a kind of stillness that often defines remote areas during holidays. In places like this, the absence of movement can feel almost absolute, as if the environment itself has paused. It was within this quiet setting that Dana Ireland was riding her bicycle, unaware that her journey would soon become the center of a violent and irreversible sequence of events. The first confirmed turning point in that sequence was a collision. A vehicle struck Dana Ireland with significant force while she was traveling along the roadway. The impact was not minor or incidental. It was strong enough to severely damage her bicycle, leaving it broken and scattered in pieces. Physical evidence later documented at the scene included fragments of the bicycle frame and components, along with traces consistent with the motor vehicle's presence. Tire marks were observed, indicating that a vehicle had been in close proximity to the point of impact. At this stage, what would normally be expected in a traffic-related incident did not occur. There was no immediate call for emergency assistance, no clear indication of the driver remaining at the scene to report the collision, and no straightforward sequence of response that would typically follow such an event. Instead, the situation shifted away from the roadway and into a more concealed environment. Dana Ireland was taken from the initial impact site into a nearby wooded area. The terrain in that region of Pune is uneven and partially dense with vegetation. It includes areas where visibility is limited and movement is more difficult to observe from surrounding roads. This environmental characteristic becomes important in understanding how events could unfold without immediate detection. Within this secluded area, the incident transitioned from a traffic collision into a violent physical assault. Dana Ireland sustained severe injuries during this phase of the event. The medical findings later confirmed multiple broken bones and significant internal trauma. These injuries indicated a level of force consistent with sustained physical violence. In addition to these injuries, evidence also showed that she had been sexually assaulted. The combination of trauma suggested that the violence did not end with a collision but continued afterward in a separate location. The sequence of events in this wooded area was not directly witnessed, and therefore must be reconstructed entirely through forensic evidence and later medical analysis. What is clear is that the nature of the injuries reflects a progression of harm rather than a single moment of impact. The condition in which Dana Ireland was eventually found showed that she had been left in a critical state following the assault. Sometime after the incident, she was discovered the following morning. The discovery marked the moment when the event transitioned from an unknown disappearance and injury scenario into a confirmed homicide investigation. Emergency responders arrived and transported her for medical treatment, but despite these efforts, her injuries were too severe. She did not survive. The location where she was found, along with the earlier crash site, formed two key physical points in the reconstruction of the event. The bicycle, damaged and separated into components, indicated the force of the initial collision. Nearby traces of a vehicle, including tire impressions and scattered fragments, suggested that a motor vehicle had been involved in the immediate aftermath. However, the arrangement of these elements did not provide a clear or linear narrative. Instead, the evidence appeared fragmented, as if the sequence of events had been interrupted or altered by movement and environmental factors. Investigators faced the challenge of reconstructing a timeline based on limited and partially disrupted physical evidence. The rural setting of the incident contributed significantly to this difficulty. The absence of nearby witnesses meant that there were no direct accounts of what occurred at the time of the collision or afterward. The timing, occurring on Christmas Eve, further reduced the likelihood of immediate observation by passers-by. In the absence of eyewitness testimony, the investigation relied heavily on forensic interpretation. However, the early 1990s represented a period in which forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, was still developing. While physical evidence could be collected and preserved, the ability to extract detailed genetic information and match it to individuals was not yet as advanced as it would later become. This limitation placed significant constraints on the early stages of the investigation. As investigators examined the scene, several possible interpretations of the events emerged. One possibility considered was that the incident began as a traffic accident in which a vehicle struck Dana, Ireland unintentionally, followed by actions taken afterward that escalated the situation into violence. Another possibility was that the collision itself was intentional and part of a broader sequence of actions leading directly to the assault. A third consideration involved the potential involvement of individuals familiar with the local area, though no definitive identification was made at that stage. Each of these possibilities reflected an attempt to interpret a set of physical facts that did not naturally form a single coherent story. The damaged bicycle, the vehicle traces, and the injuries all existed as confirmed elements, but the relationships between them were not immediately clear. This lack of clarity meant that investigators had to work with competing hypotheses rather than a single dominant theory. The early investigative process involved collecting and preserving all available evidence from the scene. This included documenting tire impressions, gathering fragments of material from both the bicycle and potential vehicle sources, and recording the spatial arrangement of the scene as it was found. Despite these efforts, the disruption of the environment made it difficult to preserve a fully intact reconstruction of the sequence of events. Over time, the investigation entered a phase where progress slowed significantly. Without clear forensic matches or identified suspects, the case did not advance in a decisive direction. The evidence remained stored, but its interpretation remained open. This created a situation in which the case was neither resolved nor actively moving forward in a meaningful way. During this period, the focus of the investigation shifted between different lines of inquiry, but none produced definitive results. The lack of technological capability in DNA analysis at the time was a major limiting factor. Physical samples that might later have been decisive could not yet be processed with sufficient precision to identify individuals or confirm involvement conclusively. Despite the lack of resolution, the case remained active in investigative records and continued to be a point of reference for law enforcement. The severity of the crime and the uncertainty surrounding its resolution ensured that it was not abandoned, even as it remained unresolved. The most consistent feature of this phase of the case is uncertainty. Each piece of evidence pointed toward involvement of a vehicle and subsequent violent interaction, but the exact sequence and intent behind those actions could not be definitively established. The absence of direct observation meant that every interpretation relied on indirect reconstruction. As time passed, the case became defined not by what was known, but by the gaps in understanding that remained. The collision was confirmed. The injuries were documented. The location was identified. But the connection between these elements remained incomplete. This incomplete structure is what allowed the case to persist in investigative focus over the following years. It was not closed because it could not be fully explained. It was not solved because the available evidence did not yet support a definitive conclusion. Instead, it existed in a state of suspended analysis, waiting for new methods or new information that might allow the fragments to be connected more clearly. In this phase of the investigation, the central challenge was not the absence of evidence, but the absence of clarity in how that evidence related to itself. The physical facts were present, but their narrative structure remained unresolved. And it is from this unresolved structure that the next major development in the case would eventually emerge, driven by advances in forensic science that were not available at the time of the original investigation. Years after the initial investigation into Dana Ireland's death had stalled, the case remained preserved in evidence rooms and case files, a collection of physical fragments waiting for a method capable of giving them new meaning. The bicycle, the tire impressions, the biological samples collected from the scene, and the documented injuries all existed as confirmed elements of the incident, but they had not yet been unified into a definitive explanation. For a long period, the case remained in this suspended state, neither closed nor actively progressing toward resolution. The turning point did not come from a new witness or a confession. It came from time and from the evolution of forensic science. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, DNA analysis had advanced significantly compared to the early 1990s, when the original investigation took place. Techniques that were once limited or unavailable became more precise, more sensitive, and more capable of extracting usable profiles from older biological samples. This development created the possibility that evidence collected years earlier could now be re-examined under a completely different technological standard. In the context of the Dana Ireland case, this meant that materials previously stored without yielding clear results could be revisited. Investigators reopened the case files and began reviewing the physical evidence that had been preserved since 1991. The goal was not to reinterpret the scene through speculation, but to apply new scientific methods to existing materials in the hope of finding connections that had previously been invisible. This process of re-examination was methodical. Evidence that had been collected from the scene, including biological samples, was carefully reassessed. The chain of custody became an important factor, as investigators needed to ensure that materials had been properly preserved over time. The integrity of the samples was critical because any degradation or contamination could affect the reliability of the results. As DNA testing was applied to the preserved evidence, results began to emerge that would fundamentally change the direction of the investigation. The analysis produced genetic profiles that were compared against available databases and investigative leads. These comparisons led to the identification of 3 individuals who would later become central figures in the legal proceedings that followed. These individuals were Albert Ian Schweitzer, Kaulana, Tony Freitas, and James Jr. Kimuela. The identification of these individuals marked a major shift in the case. For years, the investigation had lacked specific suspects tied directly to forensic evidence. Now, for the first time, DNA analysis was being used to connect physical evidence from the scene to named individuals. This development transformed the case from an unresolved historical incident into an active criminal prosecution. Following the emergence of these DNA-based leads, law enforcement moved forward with charges. The 3 men identified through the forensic process were accused of involvement in the events surrounding Dana Ireland's death. The allegations included multiple components of the incident, beginning with the vehicle collision and extending to the subsequent actions that occurred after the initial impact. These charges reflected the reconstructed sequence of events as interpreted by investigators based on the combined physical and forensic evidence. The transition from investigation to prosecution introduced a new phase in the case, one that would focus not only on reconstructing what happened, but also on determining legal responsibility. The presence of DNA evidence gave the prosecution a central scientific foundation, but it also introduced new areas of scrutiny, as the interpretation of forensic results would become a point of significant debate. As the case moved toward trial, the evidence was subjected to legal examination. The DNA findings, which had played a key role in identifying the defendants, became a focal point of both prosecution and defense arguments. The reliability of the testing methods, the handling of evidence, and the interpretation of genetic matches were all examined in detail. In addition to the DNA evidence, the broader investigative record, including witness statements and physical scene reconstruction, was also presented and analyzed in court. One of the central challenges during this phase was the passage of time between the original incident and the forensic reanalysis. Nearly a decade had passed before DNA technology was used to revisit the evidence. This time gap introduced questions about how evidence had been stored, whether it had remained uncontaminated, and how confidently results could be tied back to the original scene. These questions became part of the legal arguments surrounding the case. The prosecution presented the DNA results as a critical link connecting the defendants to the scene of the crime. From this perspective, the scientific evidence provided a level of certainty that had not existed during the initial investigation. The defense, however, challenged the interpretation of this evidence, raising concerns about how the samples were analyzed and whether the conclusions drawn from them accurately reflected what had occurred in 1991. The trial process itself was not a single, continuous event, but a series of legal proceedings that unfolded over an extended period. Multiple hearings and retrials took place, reflecting the complexity of the evidence and the seriousness of the charges. Each proceeding revisited key aspects of the case, including the forensic findings and the reconstruction of events based on both physical and testimonial evidence. During these proceedings, the DNA evidence remained central, but it was not the only factor under consideration. The broader investigative history of the case, including its initial stagnation and the limitations of early forensic methods, also influenced how the evidence was interpreted. The court had to consider not only what the DNA results showed, but also how those results fit into the broader context of a case that had evolved significantly over time. As the legal process continued, the case became increasingly complex. Arguments were made regarding the consistency of witness statements, the interpretation of physical evidence, and the reliability of conclusions drawn from both old and new investigative methods. The intersection of early 1990s investigative limitations and later forensic advancements created a layered evidentiary landscape that was not easily simplified. At different stages, some of the defendants were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. These outcomes reflected the weight given to the DNA evidence and the interpretation of the reconstructed sequence of events. However, the case did not reach a stable or universally accepted conclusion. Over time, aspects of the forensic evidence and its interpretation were challenged, leading to further legal review. Questions were raised about whether the DNA evidence had been fully and accurately understood within its original context. Concerns were also expressed regarding inconsistencies in the broader investigative record and the possibility of error in the early stages of the case. These challenges contributed to ongoing legal reconsideration and review of the convictions. As a result, the case did not settle into a single definitive resolution. Instead, it continued to exist within the legal system as a subject of ongoing examination. Some convictions were revisited, and parts of the legal outcomes were reevaluated in light of continued scrutiny of the forensic and procedural elements of the case. What makes this phase of the Dana Ireland case particularly significant is the way it demonstrates the power and limitations of forensic science in legal proceedings. DNA evidence provided a breakthrough that had not been possible during the initial investigation, but it also became a source of complexity when placed within the broader legal and factual context of the case. The same evidence that enabled identification of suspects also became the subject of detailed debate regarding interpretation and reliability. Throughout this process, the original event remained unchanged. A young woman had been struck by a vehicle, moved from the roadway, and subjected to fatal violence in a remote area of Pune. Her bicycle had been damaged, her injuries documented, and her life lost. What changed over time was not the underlying fact of her death, but the way in which that death was understood, interpreted, and legally processed. The investigative journey into her case illustrates how modern forensic tools can reshape long-standing unsolved cases, but also how the introduction of new evidence does not always lead to immediate or uncontested resolution. Instead, it can reopen questions, generate new forms of debate, and extend the life of a case within the legal system. By the end of this phase, the Dana Ireland case had moved far beyond its original investigative boundaries. It had become not only a criminal case, but also a legal and scientific discussion about the nature of evidence, the reliability of forensic reconstruction, and the challenges of applying modern methods to historical events. The next stage of the case would focus not on identifying suspects, but on the consequences of those identifications and the broader implications of a case that refused to settle into a single, final interpretation. As the Dana Ireland case moved fully into the courtroom, the focus shifted from investigation to adjudication, from the reconstruction of events to the formal assignment of responsibility. The transition was not a simple continuation of the investigative process, but a transformation of it, as evidence that had been collected and interpreted over years was now subjected to the structured scrutiny of legal procedure. In this phase, the case was no longer defined only by what had happened on a remote road in Pune, but by how those events would be understood within the framework of the justice system. The prosecution entered the courtroom with a narrative shaped by the re-examination of physical evidence, particularly the DNA analysis that had emerged years after the original investigation. This evidence formed the core of the case against the three defendants, Albert Ian Schweitzer, Kala, Atoni, Freitas, and James Jr. Kemuela. The prosecution argued that the forensic findings established a connection between these individuals and the events surrounding Dana Ireland's death, linking them to both the initial collision and the subsequent actions that took place in the wooded area. In presenting their case, prosecutors sought to construct a coherent sequence from a set of facts that had originally appeared fragmented. They emphasized the presence of biological evidence, the condition of the victim, and the physical traces found at the scene. Through this approach, they aimed to demonstrate not only that the defendants were connected to the incident, but that their involvement extended across the full sequence of events, from the moment of impact to the final assault. The defense, however, approached the case from a fundamentally different perspective. Rather than accepting the prosecution's narrative as a unified explanation, defense attorneys focused on the points of uncertainty that had characterized the investigation from the beginning. They questioned the interpretation of the DNA evidence, arguing that the conclusions drawn from it were not as definitive as presented. They also examined the conditions under which the evidence had been collected, stored, and later analyzed, raising concerns about whether the integrity of the samples could be fully assured over such an extended period. The courtroom became a space in which these competing interpretations were presented in parallel. On one side, the prosecution framed the DNA findings as a breakthrough that resolved years of uncertainty. On the other, the defense emphasized the limitations of those findings, suggesting that the scientific evidence, while significant, did not eliminate all doubt. This tension between certainty and uncertainty became a defining feature of the trial. In addition to the DNA evidence, witness testimony and investigative records were introduced. However, these elements did not always provide a stable foundation. The passage of time had affected the consistency of recollections, and earlier investigative limitations influenced the clarity of recorded statements. As a result, testimony was sometimes marked by inconsistencies, which the defense used to challenge the reliability of the overall narrative presented by the prosecution. The jurors, tasked with evaluating this complex body of evidence, were required to navigate a case that combined elements from different periods, different investigative standards, and different interpretive frameworks. They had to consider physical evidence collected in the early 1990s, analyzed using methods developed years later, and presented within the procedural structure of a modern trial. This layering of temporal and methodological differences added to the difficulty of reaching a clear and unified conclusion. Despite these challenges, the trial resulted in convictions for some of the defendants. These outcomes reflected the weight given to the forensic evidence and the prosecution's reconstruction of events. Life sentences were imposed, marking a formal acknowledgement of responsibility within the legal system. For a time, these convictions appeared to provide a form of closure, transforming a long unsolved case into one that had reached a definitive judicial outcome. However, the sense of finality was not sustained. As the case continued to be examined, questions about the evidence and the investigative process persisted. The DNA analysis, which had been central to the convictions, became the subject of further scrutiny. Critics argued that aspects of the evidence may have been misinterpreted or overstated, raising the possibility that the conclusions drawn from it were not as certain as initially believed. At the same time, the inconsistencies in witness testimony and the acknowledged limitations of the original investigation were revisited. These elements, which had been present throughout the case, gained renewed attention as part of broader efforts to reassess the convictions. The legal process, rather than concluding with the initial verdicts, entered a new phase of review and reconsideration. Over the following years, the case became increasingly complex as appeals and legal challenges were filed. These proceedings focused on the reliability of the evidence, the fairness of the trial, and the possibility of error in both the investigative and prosecutorial stages. The courts were required to examine not only the outcomes of the trial, but also the processes that had led to those outcomes. As a result of this continued scrutiny, some of the convictions were revisited, and aspects of the case were re-evaluated. This did not produce a simple reversal or confirmation, but rather a series of legal developments that reflected the ongoing uncertainty surrounding the case. The initial verdicts, once seen as definitive, became part of a larger and more complicated legal narrative. The Dana Ireland case thus evolved into a situation where the courtroom did not provide a single, stable resolution. Instead, it became a site of ongoing interpretation, where evidence was repeatedly examined, questioned, and reinterpreted. The legal system, designed to produce final judgments, found itself engaged in a process that extended far beyond the initial trial. One of the most significant aspects of this phase is the way it highlights the interaction between scientific evidence and legal reasoning. DNA analysis, often viewed as a highly reliable form of evidence, played a central role in the case. Yet its interpretation depended on context, methodology, and the integration of other forms of evidence. When these elements were questioned, the perceived certainty of the DNA findings was also affected. This interaction underscores a broader challenge in the justice system, the need to translate complex scientific information into legal conclusions that must meet standards of proof and fairness. In the Dana Ireland case, this translation was not straightforward. The same evidence that supported convictions also became a focal point for doubt and reconsideration, illustrating the difficulty of achieving consensus in cases involving advanced forensic methods. As the legal proceedings continued, the case remained unresolved in a broader sense, even as it produced specific outcomes at different stages. The convictions, the appeals, and the ongoing debates all became part of a layered legal history that reflected both the strengths and limitations of the system. Each stage of the process added new dimensions to the case, without fully resolving the questions that had existed from the beginning. By the end of this phase, the Dana Ireland case had moved beyond the boundaries of a single trial. It had become a complex legal narrative involving multiple proceedings, evolving interpretations of evidence, and ongoing efforts to reconcile scientific findings with legal standards. The courtroom, rather than closing the case, had expanded it, transforming it into a prolonged examination of how justice is pursued in situations marked by uncertainty and change. What remained constant throughout this process was the original event, a young woman's life taken in a remote area under circumstances that were never fully clarified in a way that satisfied all perspectives. The legal system had responded with investigation, prosecution, and judgment, but it had not produced a resolution that eliminated all doubt. And so, as the case moved forward, it carried with it both the weight of its conclusions and the persistence of its unanswered questions. The next stage would shift the focus once again, from the courtroom to the broader impact of the case, examining how it shaped public perception, legal discourse, and the ongoing conversation about the nature of justice itself. In the years that followed the trials and the successive legal challenges, the Dana Ireland case did not settle into a fixed conclusion. Instead, it continued to exist in the public consciousness as a case defined as much by its unresolved tensions as by its established facts. What had begun as a violent incident on a remote road in Pune evolved into a long-standing point of reflection for the legal system, for forensic science, and for the broader understanding of how justice is pursued when certainty is difficult to achieve. One of the most immediate and lasting effects of the case was its impact on public confidence. The initial investigation had been marked by limited technological capability and an inability to identify clear suspects. Years later, the introduction of DNA evidence appeared to offer a path toward resolution, providing a scientific basis for identifying individuals connected to the crime. Yet the subsequent disputes over the interpretation of that evidence complicated the narrative. What had once been seen as a definitive breakthrough became a subject of ongoing debate, raising questions about how evidence should be understood and how conclusions should be drawn from it. For many observers, the case highlighted the tension between expectation and reality in the justice system. There is often an expectation that legal processes will lead to clear and final answers, especially in cases involving serious crimes. The Dana Ireland case challenged this expectation by demonstrating that even with advanced forensic tools, the path to resolution can remain uncertain. The presence of scientific evidence did not eliminate disagreement. Instead, it shifted the focus of that disagreement to new areas, including methodology, interpretation, and the integration of different types of evidence. This shift had broader implications for how forensic science is perceived within the legal system. DNA analysis, in particular, has often been regarded as a powerful and reliable means of establishing connections between individuals and crime scenes. In this case, however, the use of DNA evidence revealed both its strengths and its limitations. While it enabled investigators to identify potential suspects years after the crime, it also became clear that the interpretation of genetic data is not always straightforward. Context matters, and without a fully coherent narrative to support it, even strong scientific evidence can become a point of contention. The case also brought attention to the importance of early investigative procedures. The initial response to the crime, constrained by the technological and procedural standards of the early 1990s, played a significant role in shaping everything that followed. Evidence collection, preservation, and documentation are critical in any investigation, but their importance becomes even more pronounced when cases are revisited years or decades later. In the Dana Ireland case, the ability to reanalyze preserved samples was essential to reopening the investigation, but the questions surrounding how those samples were handled over time also became part of the legal debate. Another lasting impact of the case lies in its illustration of the risks associated with wrongful conviction. As the legal proceedings evolved and aspects of the evidence were questioned, the possibility that errors could have occurred at various stages of the process became a subject of concern. This does not provide a definitive answer about the guilt or innocence of the individuals involved, but it does highlight the importance of maintaining rigorous standards in both investigation and prosecution. The case serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice must balance the need for accountability with the need for accuracy. The extended timeline of the case further contributed to its complexity. Spanning multiple decades, it bridged different eras of forensic science, legal practice, and public awareness. Each phase of the case was influenced by the context in which it occurred, from the limitations of early investigation to the advancements of later analysis. This temporal layering created a situation in which evidence and interpretation were not static but evolved over time, sometimes in ways that introduced new uncertainties rather than resolving existing ones. For the community in Hawaii, the case remained a point of reflection on both local and systemic levels. It raised questions about safety in rural areas, about the capacity of law enforcement to respond effectively to serious crimes, and about the relationship between technological advancement and justice. The fact that the victim was a visitor added another dimension, as the case resonated beyond the local community and became part of a broader conversation about crime and accountability. In academic and legal discussions, the Dana Ireland case has often been referenced as an example of the complexities inherent in modern criminal justice. It illustrates how cases can evolve over time, how new evidence can reshape old narratives, and how legal systems must adapt to incorporate advances in science while maintaining standards of fairness and due process. The case does not provide simple answers, but it offers valuable insights into the challenges of achieving resolution in situations where evidence is both powerful and contested. At a deeper level, the case invites reflection on the nature of justice itself. Justice is often understood as the alignment of truth, accountability, and resolution. In practice, however, these elements do not always converge. The Dana Ireland case demonstrates how truth can remain partially obscured, how accountability can be debated, and how resolution can be procedural rather than universally accepted. This divergence does not negate the importance of the legal process, but it does highlight its limitations. The persistence of the case in public discourse is also linked to its unresolved aspects. Cases that conclude with clear and uncontested outcomes tend to fade into the background over time. In contrast, cases that retain elements of uncertainty continue to attract attention, as they raise questions that remain open. The Dana Ireland case belongs to this latter category, maintaining its relevance through the very fact that it resists definitive interpretation. This ongoing relevance is not only a reflection of the case itself, but also of the broader context in which it is discussed. As forensic science continues to advance, and as legal systems continue to evolve, cases like this one serve as reference points for understanding how these changes interact. They provide real-world examples of the challenges and opportunities that arise when new methods are applied to old problems. In the final analysis, the Dana Ireland case stands as a complex intersection of evidence, interpretation, and time. It begins with a violent act in a remote location and extends into decades of investigation, legal proceedings, and reflection. Each stage adds to the overall narrative, but none fully resolves it. The result is a case that remains open in its meaning, even as it has been addressed in formal legal terms. What endures most strongly is the recognition that behind all the analysis, all the evidence, and all the legal arguments, there is a life that was lost. Dana Ireland's presence in Hawaii was brief, but the impact of her death has been long-lasting. The case that bears her name continues to shape discussions about justice, not because it provides clear answers, but because it reveals how difficult those answers can be to obtain. In that sense, the case does not conclude with a final statement, but with a continued question. It asks how societies respond to violence, how they interpret evidence, and how they define justice when certainty is out of reach. It remains a reminder that the pursuit of truth is not always a straight path, and that the search for resolution can extend far beyond the moment when a case first enters the public eye. In examining the Dana Ireland case through an even wider lens, its lasting importance emerges not only from the sequence of events or the legal proceedings that followed, but from the way it reshapes the understanding of how truth is constructed in complex criminal cases. The facts themselves, though limited in clarity, are not what make the case endure across decades. Rather, it is the interaction between those facts and the systems designed to interpret them that continues to generate reflection. The case becomes less about a single narrative and more about the layered process through which narratives are formed, challenged, and reformed over time. At its core, the case reveals the tension between physical evidence and interpretive meaning. The material facts remain constant. A young woman struck by a vehicle, removed from the roadside, subjected to violence, and later found in a critical condition from which she did not recover. These elements form the foundation of the case, and they are not in dispute. What is contested is how these elements connect to one another, what intentions they imply, and how responsibility should be assigned. This gap between what is known and what can be concluded becomes the central challenge, shaping every stage of the case's development. The introduction of DNA analysis marked a significant shift in this dynamic. It offered a tool capable of connecting individuals to physical evidence in ways that had not previously been possible. Yet the presence of such a tool did not eliminate the need for interpretation. Instead, it introduced a new layer of complexity. DNA evidence does not exist in isolation. It must be contextualized within a broader narrative that explains how and why it is present. In the Dana Ireland case, this contextualization became a point of contention, as different interpretations of the same data led to different conclusions about the sequence of events. This dynamic highlights a fundamental characteristic of forensic science. Its power lies not only in its technical capabilities, but also in how its results are understood and applied. Scientific findings can provide strong indications, but they do not automatically produce a complete narrative. The process of translating scientific data into legal conclusions involves judgment, interpretation, and the integration of multiple forms of evidence. When these elements do not align perfectly, uncertainty persists. The courtroom proceedings in the case illustrate this challenge in a particularly clear way. Legal trials are structured environments designed to resolve disputes through the evaluation of evidence. They rely on rules, standards, and procedures intended to guide participants toward a final decision. However, these structures assume that the evidence presented can be interpreted within a shared framework of understanding. When such a framework is absent or fragmented, the process becomes more complex. In the Dana Ireland case, the coexistence of strong forensic evidence and unresolved contextual questions created a situation in which the trial could produce outcomes without fully resolving underlying uncertainties. This distinction between procedural resolution and interpretive closure is critical. A trial can conclude with a verdict, but that verdict does not necessarily eliminate all doubt or disagreement. In cases where evidence is contested or open to multiple interpretations, the outcome may be legally definitive while remaining socially and intellectually debated. The Dana Ireland case exemplifies this condition, as its legal proceedings resulted in convictions that were later revisited and questioned. The revisiting of those convictions further underscores the evolving nature of the case. Legal systems are not static. They allow for review, appeal, and reconsideration. These mechanisms are essential for ensuring fairness, but they also reveal that conclusions reached at one point in time may be reevaluated in light of new information or new perspectives. In this case, the ongoing examination of evidence and procedure reflects a recognition that certainty is not always immediate or permanent. Beyond the legal system, the case also influences how communities understand and respond to crime. The circumstances of Dana Ireland's death, occurring in a remote area and involving both a vehicle collision and subsequent violence, challenge assumptions about safety and predictability. They highlight how ordinary activities, such as riding a bicycle, can become vulnerable in environments where isolation limits immediate response. This awareness contributes to a broader understanding of risk, particularly in rural settings where distance and visibility can complicate both prevention and response. At the same time, the case raises questions about the role of time in shaping justice. The delay between the original incident and the application of advanced forensic techniques illustrates how the passage of time can both hinder and enable investigation. On one hand, evidence may degrade, memories may fade, and opportunities for immediate resolution may be lost. On the other hand, new technologies can provide capabilities that were previously unavailable, allowing investigators to revisit cases with fresh tools. This dual effect of time adds another layer of complexity to the pursuit of justice, as it introduces both obstacles and opportunities. The interplay between past and present is particularly evident in the way evidence is reinterpreted. Materials collected in 1991 were analyzed using methods developed years later, creating a situation in which the same physical objects carried different meanings depending on the context of their examination. This temporal shift does not change the evidence itself, but it changes how that evidence is understood. As a result, the narrative of the case evolves, not because the facts have changed, but because the methods of interpretation have advanced. This evolving narrative also affects how the case is remembered and discussed. In public discourse, the Dana Ireland case is often referenced as an example of both the potential and the limitations of modern criminal justice. It demonstrates how scientific progress can bring new insights, but also how those insights must be carefully integrated into a broader framework of evidence and reasoning. The case does not offer a simple model of success or failure. Instead, it presents a complex picture in which progress and uncertainty coexist. From an analytical perspective, the case invites consideration of how legal systems manage ambiguity. Ambiguity is an inherent part of many investigations, particularly those involving limited evidence or complex circumstances. The challenge lies in determining how much ambiguity can be resolved and how much must be accepted. In the Dana Ireland case, ambiguity was not fully eliminated at any stage. Instead, it was managed, interpreted, and revisited, becoming a persistent feature of the case rather than a temporary obstacle. This persistence has implications for how justice is defined. If justice is understood as the achievement of complete certainty, then cases like this reveal the difficulty of reaching that standard. If it is understood as the application of procedures designed to produce fair outcomes based on available evidence, then the focus shifts to the integrity of the process rather than the completeness of the result. The Dana Ireland case sits at the intersection of these definitions, illustrating both the aspirations and the constraints of the justice system. In reflecting on the case, it becomes clear that its significance extends beyond its specific details. It serves as a broader example of how complex cases unfold over time, how evidence is interpreted within changing contexts, and how legal systems respond to uncertainty. These lessons are not confined to this single case. They apply to many situations in which truth is difficult to establish and resolution is difficult to achieve. Ultimately, the Dana Ireland case endures because it resists simplification. It does not resolve into a clear narrative with a definitive conclusion. Instead, it remains a layered and evolving story, shaped by the interaction of evidence, interpretation, and time. Its impact lies not only in what happened, but in how it continues to be understood. In this sense, the case becomes a reflection of the broader human effort to make sense of events that do not easily fit into established frameworks. It shows that the search for truth is often complex, that the path to justice is not always direct, and that the answers we seek may remain incomplete even after years of investigation and analysis. As the Dana Ireland case continues to be examined through extended reflection, its complexity becomes less about the sequence of events and more about the way those events are processed across time, institutions, and perspectives. What began as a violent encounter on a remote road has evolved into a layered narrative that resists final resolution, not because the facts are entirely unknown, but because their interpretation remains unsettled. This enduring instability transforms the case into a broader study of how justice systems interact with uncertainty and how meaning is constructed when definitive answers remain elusive. One of the most significant aspects of the case is the way it illustrates the persistence of interpretive divergence. Even after the introduction of DNA evidence and the identification of suspects, agreement on the meaning of that evidence was not universal. Different participants in the legal process, including investigators, attorneys, and observers, approached the same information with different assumptions and expectations. These differences influenced how evidence was evaluated and how conclusions were drawn, resulting in multiple coexisting narratives rather than a single unified account. This divergence is not simply a matter of disagreement. It reflects deeper structural characteristics of complex cases. When evidence is incomplete or open to interpretation, the process of understanding it becomes inherently subjective. Legal systems attempt to manage this subjectivity through rules and procedures, but those mechanisms cannot fully eliminate the influence of perspective. In the Dana Ireland case, the persistence of differing interpretations demonstrates the limits of procedural frameworks in achieving consensus when foundational assumptions are not shared. The role of forensic science in this context is particularly instructive. DNA analysis provided a powerful tool for connecting individuals to physical evidence, offering a level of precision that was not available during the initial investigation. However, the application of this tool did not resolve all uncertainties. Instead, it introduced new questions about how the evidence should be interpreted and how it should be integrated into the broader narrative of the case. The scientific data itself remained constant, but its meaning varied depending on how it was contextualized within the sequence of events. This variability highlights the distinction between data and interpretation. While forensic evidence can provide objective information, the conclusions drawn from that information depend on the frameworks through which it is viewed. In legal settings, these frameworks are shaped by standards of proof, rules of admissibility, and the adversarial nature of the trial process. As a result, the same piece of evidence can support different arguments depending on how it is presented and understood. The courtroom proceedings in the Dana Ireland case serve as a clear example of this dynamic. The trial was not merely a presentation of facts, but a structured contest between competing interpretations of those facts. Each side sought to construct a narrative that aligned with its objectives, using the available evidence to support its position. The jury, in turn, was tasked with evaluating these narratives and reaching a decision based on the standard of proof required by law. This process, while essential to the functioning of the legal system, also reveals how outcomes are shaped by the interaction of evidence and interpretation rather than by evidence alone. The subsequent legal challenges and reviews further emphasize this point. As aspects of the case were re-examined, the same evidence was subjected to new forms of analysis and new interpretive frameworks. This process did not necessarily produce clearer answers. Instead, it often highlighted the complexity of the evidence and the difficulty of drawing definitive conclusions from it. The case thus became an ongoing dialogue rather than a concluded matter, with each stage adding new perspectives without fully resolving existing uncertainties. Beyond the legal system, the case also influences broader discussions about the nature of truth in complex situations. In everyday contexts, truth is often understood as a fixed and discoverable reality. In cases like this, however, truth becomes more difficult to define. The physical events that occurred are real and unchanging, but the understanding of those events is shaped by interpretation, context, and available evidence. This creates a situation in which multiple versions of the truth can coexist, each supported by different aspects of the same underlying facts. The impact of this dynamic extends to public perception. For those following the case, the lack of a clear and uncontested resolution can be unsettling. It challenges the expectation that serious crimes will be fully explained and definitively resolved. Instead, it presents a more complex reality in which answers are partial and subject to revision. This can affect trust in the justice system, not because the system fails to function, but because its outcomes do not always align with expectations of certainty. At the same time, the case highlights the importance of continued inquiry. The fact that it has been revisited multiple times reflects a commitment to examining evidence thoroughly and reconsidering conclusions when necessary. This process is essential for maintaining the integrity of the justice system, even though it may prolong uncertainty. In this sense, the ongoing examination of the case can be seen not as a failure to reach closure, but as an effort to approach truth as closely as possible within the constraints of available information. The temporal dimension of the case also plays a significant role in its complexity. As years pass, the context in which the case is understood changes. Advances in forensic science, shifts in legal standards, and evolving public attitudes all influence how the case is interpreted. This means that the case is not static but dynamic, with its meaning evolving over time. What was once considered a strong conclusion may later be questioned, and what was once uncertain may gain clarity through new methods of analysis. This evolving context underscores the importance of adaptability in the justice system. Legal processes must be capable of incorporating new information and responding to changing circumstances. However, this adaptability also introduces challenges, as it requires balancing the need for finality with a need for accuracy. The Dana Ireland case illustrates how difficult this balance can be to achieve, particularly when new evidence emerges long after the original events. Another important aspect of the case is its reflection of the human dimension of justice. Behind the legal arguments, forensic analyses, and procedural developments is the reality of a life lost and the impact of that loss on others. While the case is often discussed in terms of evidence and interpretation, it is also a reminder of the human consequences of unresolved violence. This dimension adds emotional weight to the case, reinforcing the importance of seeking understanding even when certainty is difficult to achieve. In considering the broader implications of the case, it becomes clear that it serves as a valuable example for understanding the limits of knowledge. Not all questions can be answered fully, and not all uncertainties can be resolved. The pursuit of truth is an ongoing process, one that involves revisiting assumptions, re-examining evidence, and remaining open to new interpretations. The Dana Ireland case embodies this process, demonstrating both its necessity and its challenges. The case also invites reflection on how societies define justice in the face of uncertainty. If justice is seen as the achievement of complete and unquestioned truth, then cases like this highlight the difficulty of reaching that ideal. If it is understood as the best possible resolution based on available evidence and fair procedures, then the focus shifts to the quality of the process rather than the completeness of the outcome. The Dana Ireland case exists at the intersection of these perspectives, illustrating the tension between aspiration and reality. In the final analysis, the enduring significance of the case lies in its refusal to be simplified. It does not provide clear answers or easy conclusions. Instead, it offers a complex and evolving narrative that challenges assumptions about how truth is discovered and how justice is achieved. Its value lies not in the certainty it provides, but in the questions it raises and the insights it offers into the nature of legal and human understanding. As time continues to pass, the Dana Ireland case remains a point of reference for discussions about forensic science, legal procedure, and the interpretation of evidence. It stands as a reminder that the search for truth is rarely straightforward, and that the path to justice is often shaped by factors that extend beyond the immediate facts of a case. In this way, it continues to influence how such cases are approached, understood, and remembered. As the Dana Ireland case continues to be examined across time, its enduring complexity becomes less about resolving a single sequence of events and more about understanding how systems respond when resolution remains incomplete. The case has gradually moved beyond its origin as a violent crime and into the realm of ongoing analysis, where legal reasoning, scientific interpretation, and human perception intersect in ways that resist simplification. It is within this intersection that the deeper significance of the case emerges, revealing not only the challenges of determining what happened, but also the limitations inherent in the methods used to determine it. One of the most striking features of the case is the way it exposes the layered nature of certainty. At the most basic level, certain facts are not disputed. Dana Ireland was struck by a vehicle, she was moved from the roadway, she suffered severe injuries including evidence of assault, and she ultimately died as a result. These facts form a stable core, a foundation upon which all interpretations are built. Yet beyond this foundation, certainty begins to fragment. The precise sequence of actions, the intentions behind those actions, and the identities and roles of those involved remain subject to interpretation, even after years of investigation and legal proceedings. This fragmentation is not a failure of observation but a reflection of the conditions under which the event occurred. The rural setting, the absence of immediate witnesses, and the initial limitations of forensic technology all contributed to a situation in which critical details were never directly captured. As a result, the case has always depended on reconstruction rather than direct observation, and reconstruction inherently involves interpretation. Each piece of evidence provides a fragment of the overall picture, but the process of assembling those fragments into a coherent whole is shaped by assumptions, methodologies, and perspectives. The introduction of DNA analysis added a new dimension to this process, offering a means of connecting individuals to physical evidence with a level of specificity that had previously been unattainable. This development represented a significant advancement, but it also introduced new complexities. DNA evidence can indicate presence, but it does not, by itself, explain context. It does not describe the sequence of events or the intentions behind actions. These aspects must still be inferred, and inferences can vary depending on how the evidence is interpreted. In the Dana Ireland case, this distinction became particularly important. The DNA findings were used to identify individuals and support a narrative of involvement, but the interpretation of those findings was not universally accepted. Questions arose about how the evidence was collected, how it was preserved, and how it was analyzed years later. These questions did not necessarily negate the value of the DNA evidence, but they did complicate its interpretation, making it one element within a broader and more contested evidentiary landscape. The legal proceedings reflected this complexity. Trials are designed to produce decisions based on the evaluation of evidence, but they operate within a framework that requires conclusions to be drawn even when uncertainty remains. Jurors are asked to weigh competing narratives and determine which is more consistent with the available evidence, but this process does not eliminate ambiguity. Instead, it channels ambiguity into a structured decision-making process, resulting in outcomes that are legally binding but not necessarily universally accepted. The subsequent appeals and reviews further illustrate this point. As the case was revisited, the same evidence was examined from different angles, leading to new questions and new interpretations. This process did not simply refine the original conclusions, it sometimes challenged them, suggesting that earlier interpretations may have been incomplete or flawed. The ability to revisit cases is a crucial feature of the legal system, but it also highlights the provisional nature of conclusions reached under conditions of uncertainty. This provisional nature extends beyond the courtroom and into the broader societal understanding of the case. For those who follow it, the Dana Ireland case does not present a clear narrative with a definitive endpoint. Instead, it remains open, a subject of ongoing discussion and reflection. This openness can be difficult to reconcile with the expectation that serious crimes will be fully resolved, but it also reflects the reality that not all cases conform to that expectation. The case also underscores the importance of critical evaluation in the interpretation of evidence. Scientific advancements such as DNA analysis provide powerful tools, but their effectiveness depends on how they are applied and understood. Misinterpretation, over-reliance, or insufficient contextualization can lead to conclusions that are later questioned. In this sense, the case serves as a reminder that scientific evidence, while highly valuable, must be integrated carefully into the broader investigative and legal process. At a deeper level, the Dana Ireland case invites reflection on the nature of truth in complex situations. Truth is often perceived as a singular, objective reality that can be uncovered through investigation. In practice, however, the process of uncovering truth is mediated by evidence, interpretation, and context. When these elements are incomplete or contested, the resulting understanding of truth becomes less definitive. The case illustrates how truth can exist in layers, with some aspects clearly established and others remaining uncertain. This layered understanding of truth has implications for how justice is defined and pursued. If justice is equated with the discovery of complete and unambiguous truth, then cases like this reveal the limitations of that ideal. If it is instead understood as the application of fair procedures to the best available evidence, then the focus shifts to the integrity of the process rather than the completeness of the outcome. The Dana Ireland case occupies a space between these definitions, demonstrating both the necessity of procedural justice and the challenges of achieving comprehensive understanding. The human dimension of the case remains central throughout this analysis. Behind the evidence, the legal arguments, and the ongoing debates is the reality of a young woman whose life was taken under violent circumstances. This fact anchors the case, providing a constant reference point amid the shifting interpretations. It also serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice is not an abstract exercise, but a response to real harm and loss. As time continues to pass, the case remains relevant not only because of its unresolved aspects, but because of what it reveals about the systems designed to address such situations. It highlights the interplay between technology and investigation, the role of interpretation in legal decision-making, and the challenges of maintaining confidence in outcomes that are subject to ongoing debate. These themes extend beyond the specifics of the case, offering insights into the broader functioning of criminal justice systems. The Dana Ireland case does not conclude in a traditional sense. It does not provide a final, uncontested answer that resolves all questions. Instead, it remains an evolving narrative, shaped by new information, new interpretations, and ongoing reflection. This lack of finality is not necessarily a failure. It is a reflection of the complexity inherent in certain types of cases, where the available evidence supports multiple interpretations and where certainty cannot be fully achieved. In the end, the case stands as an example of how difficult it can be to align evidence, interpretation, and judgment in a way that produces complete resolution. It demonstrates that the pursuit of truth is often an ongoing process, one that continues even after legal proceedings have concluded. And it reminds us that in the face of uncertainty, the most important task may not be to eliminate all doubt, but to engage with that doubt in a way that is careful, critical, and committed to fairness. As the Dana Ireland case extends further into reflection, it becomes less a matter of reconstructing a past event and more an examination of how meaning is sustained over time when resolution remains incomplete. The case exists not only in legal records or investigative archives, but in the ongoing effort to interpret what those records represent. Each review, each reconsideration, and each discussion adds another layer to an already complex structure, reinforcing the idea that certain cases do not conclude in a definitive sense, but instead continue to evolve in how they are understood. One of the most enduring elements of the case is the way it challenges the expectation that time will naturally bring clarity. In many instances, the passage of time allows for new evidence to emerge, for witnesses to come forward, or for technological advances to provide answers that were previously out of reach. In the Dana Ireland case, time did introduce new tools, particularly in the form of DNA analysis, but it did not resolve all uncertainties. Instead, It revealed new dimensions of the case, creating additional questions alongside the answers it provided. This dual effect demonstrates that time is not inherently a force of resolution, but rather a variable that can both clarify and complicate. The persistence of uncertainty in the case is closely tied to the conditions under which the original event occurred. The remote location, the absence of immediate witnesses, and the limitations of early investigative methods created a situation in which critical details were never fully captured. These initial gaps have continued to influence every subsequent stage of the case. Even as new methods have been applied, they've had to work within the constraints imposed by those early limitations, leading to interpretations that remain contingent rather than definitive. This continuity between past limitations and present analysis underscores the importance of context in understanding evidence. Evidence does not exist independently of the conditions in which it is collected and interpreted. In the Dana Ireland case, the same physical materials have been examined under different technological standards and within different interpretive frameworks. Each examination has produced insights, but none has been able to fully bridge the gap between what is known and what is inferred. This highlights the reality that evidence, no matter how advanced the methods used to analyze it, cannot always compensate for the absence of direct observation or complete documentation. The legal system's engagement with a case reflects this complexity. Courts are tasked with making decisions based on the evidence presented, but they must do so within a structure that requires conclusions even when uncertainty persists. This necessity creates a tension between the need for finality and the recognition of ambiguity. In the Dana Ireland case, this tension is evident in the progression from initial convictions to subsequent reviews and challenges. Each stage represents an attempt to reconcile the available evidence with the standards of proof required by law, yet the outcomes have not fully resolved the underlying questions. This ongoing process reveals an important aspect of legal decision-making. It is both definitive and provisional at the same time. A verdict establishes a legal outcome, but it does not necessarily close the case in a broader sense. The possibility of appeal, review, and reconsideration means that legal conclusions remain open to re-examination. In cases where evidence is complex or contested, this openness becomes more pronounced, as new interpretations can lead to new legal developments. The Dana Ireland case also illustrates the role of doubt within the justice system. Doubt is often seen as an obstacle to resolution, something to be minimized or eliminated in order to reach a clear conclusion. However, in practice, doubt is an inherent part of many investigations, particularly those involving incomplete or ambiguous evidence. The challenge is not simply to remove doubt, but to determine how much doubt is acceptable within the framework of legal standards. This determination is not purely objective. It involves judgment, interpretation, and the application of procedural rules. In this case, doubt has persisted despite the presence of significant forensic evidence. The DNA analysis that played a central role in identifying suspects also became a source of debate, as its interpretation was questioned and reevaluated. This demonstrates that even highly regarded forms of evidence do not automatically eliminate uncertainty. Instead, they shift the focus of that uncertainty, raising new questions about how the evidence should be understood and applied. The broader implications of the case extend beyond its specific details, offering insights into the relationship between science and law. Forensic science provides tools for analyzing evidence, but the application of those tools within a legal context requires careful consideration. Scientific findings must be translated into legal arguments, evaluated within the standards of proof, and integrated with other forms of evidence. This process is complex and can produce different outcomes depending on how the evidence is interpreted. The Dana Ireland case exemplifies this complexity, showing how scientific advances can both enhance and complicate the pursuit of justice. Another significant aspect of the case is its impact on public perception. Cases that remain unresolved or contested over long periods tend to attract ongoing attention, as they challenge the expectation that serious crimes will be fully explained. The Dana Ireland case has become a reference point for discussions about the reliability of forensic evidence, the possibility of wrongful convictions, and the challenges of achieving closure in complex cases. This public dimension adds another layer to the case, influencing how it is understood and remembered. At the same time, the case highlights the importance of maintaining a focus on the individual at its center. Amid the legal arguments and scientific debates, it is easy to lose sight of the fact that the case originates from the death of a young woman. Dana Ireland's experience is the foundation of everything that followed, and her loss remains the most concrete and undeniable aspect of the case. This human element provides a grounding perspective, reminding us that the pursuit of justice is ultimately about responding to real harm. In considering the case as a whole, it becomes clear that its significance lies not in providing answers, but in raising questions. It challenges assumptions about how evidence should be interpreted, how legal systems should operate, and how truth can be established in complex situations. These questions do not have simple answers, and they extend beyond the boundaries of a single case. They are part of a broader inquiry into the nature of knowledge, the limits of certainty, and the responsibilities of institutions tasked with determining truth. The Dana Ireland case also serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process rather than a single event. Investigations, trials, and appeals are all part of a continuum in which evidence is examined, conclusions are drawn, and those conclusions are subject to re-evaluation. This process can be lengthy and complex, particularly in cases where uncertainty persists. However, it reflects a commitment to seeking accuracy and fairness, even when definitive answers are difficult to obtain. As the case continues to be discussed and analyzed, it remains a living example of how complex criminal cases evolve over time. It demonstrates that resolution is not always a final state, but can instead be a series of stages, each contributing to a deeper understanding of the underlying issues. This perspective shifts the focus from achieving closure to engaging with complexity, recognizing that some cases may never be fully resolved in a traditional sense. In the end, the Dana Ireland case stands as a testament to the challenges of interpreting evidence, the limitations of legal processes, and the enduring impact of unresolved questions. It does not offer a clear conclusion, but it provides a framework for thinking about how truth and justice are pursued in the face of uncertainty. Through its complexity, it invites continued reflection, ensuring that its significance extends far beyond the events that first brought it into the public eye. As the Dana Ireland case continues to unfold in the realm of long-term reflection, it begins to function less as a singular narrative and more as an enduring framework through which the limits of justice can be examined. It is not simply a story about a crime, nor solely about an investigation or a trial, but about the evolving relationship between evidence, interpretation, and time. Each layer added to the case over the decades does not replace the previous one, but instead coexists with it, creating a structure that is cumulative rather than conclusive. At the center of this structure lies a fundamental imbalance between what is known and what can be proven. The known elements of the case are stark and unchanging: a young woman traveling alone, a violent encounter initiated by a vehicle, a movement away from the road into a more isolated space, and a series of injuries that ultimately resulted in death. These elements form a factual core that is not in dispute. Yet surrounding this core is a wide perimeter of uncertainty, where the precise mechanisms, intentions, and responsibilities remain subject to interpretation. This imbalance shapes every attempt to understand the case, as efforts to construct a coherent narrative must bridge the gap between these two domains. The persistence of this gap reveals an important truth about complex investigations: that evidence alone does not guarantee clarity. Evidence must be interpreted, and interpretation is influenced by context, methodology, and perspective. In the Dana Ireland case, the same body of evidence has been examined under different conditions and with different tools, producing interpretations that are not always aligned. This variability does not necessarily indicate error. Rather, it reflects the inherent difficulty of reconstructing events that were never directly observed and that left behind only partial traces. The introduction of advanced forensic techniques, particularly DNA analysis, marked a significant moment in the evolution of the case. It demonstrated how technological progress can reopen investigations that once seemed stalled, providing new avenues for inquiry and new forms of connection between individuals and evidence. However, the impact of this development was not purely clarifying. While it offered a means of identifying potential suspects, it also introduced new layers of interpretation that required careful evaluation. The meaning of DNA evidence depends not only on its scientific validity, but also on how it is contextualized within the broader narrative of the case. This need for contextualization underscores the importance of integrating different types of evidence. Physical traces, forensic data, witness statements, and investigative records all contribute to the overall understanding of a case, but they do not always align perfectly. Discrepancies between these elements can create points of tension that complicate the process of drawing conclusions. In the Dana Ireland case, such discrepancies have been a recurring feature, influencing both the legal proceedings and the ongoing discussions surrounding the case. The legal system's response to these challenges highlights the complexity of translating evidence into judgment. Courts are designed to evaluate evidence and reach decisions, but they operate within constraints that require conclusions to be drawn even when uncertainty remains. This necessity can lead to outcomes that are definitive in a legal sense, but open to question in a broader context. The convictions and subsequent reviews in the Dana Ireland case illustrate this dynamic, as legal decisions have been made and later re-examined in light of new interpretations and ongoing debate. This cycle of decision and reconsideration reflects a broader principle within the justice system, that conclusions are not always final. The ability to revisit cases is an essential safeguard against error, but it also means that cases can remain in a state of partial resolution for extended periods. In the Dana Ireland case, this has resulted in a prolonged engagement with the evidence, as each new phase of analysis adds to the overall understanding without fully resolving the underlying uncertainties. The case also raises important questions about the role of narrative in the pursuit of justice. Narratives are necessary for organizing evidence into a coherent form that can be evaluated and understood. However, when evidence is incomplete or ambiguous, the construction of a narrative becomes more complex. Different narratives may emerge, each supported by different interpretations of the same evidence. In the courtroom, these narratives are presented and contested, but the outcome of that contest does not necessarily determine which narrative is ultimately accepted outside the legal framework. This distinction between legal and broader acceptance is particularly relevant in cases that attract sustained public attention. The Dana Ireland case has become part of a larger conversation about forensic science, legal procedure, and the possibility of wrongful conviction. Its unresolved aspects contribute to its continued relevance as they invite ongoing examination and discussion. The case is not only remembered for what happened, but for how it has been interpreted and reinterpreted over time. The influence of time on the case is both profound and multifaceted. Time allows for the development of new technologies and methods, but it also introduces challenges related to the preservation and interpretation of evidence. Memories fade, physical materials can degrade, and the context in which evidence is understood can change. These factors create a dynamic environment in which the meaning of evidence is not fixed, but evolves as new information and perspectives are introduced. This evolving environment underscores the importance of adaptability in both investigation and legal analysis. Systems must be capable of incorporating new evidence and reassessing previous conclusions, but they must also maintain standards of reliability and fairness. Balancing these requirements is a complex task, particularly in cases where the stakes are high and the evidence is contested. The Dana Ireland case exemplifies this challenge, as it has required ongoing adjustments in response to new developments while remaining grounded in the original facts. At a deeper level, the case invites reflection on the nature of certainty itself. In many contexts, certainty is treated as an attainable goal, something that can be achieved through sufficient evidence and analysis. However, the Dana Ireland case suggests that certainty may not always be fully attainable, especially in situations where critical information is missing or ambiguous. This does not render the pursuit of truth meaningless, but it does require a recognition of its limits. Understanding these limits is essential for making informed decisions about how to interpret evidence and how to apply it within the framework of justice. The human dimension of the case remains a constant presence throughout this process. The analytical complexity of the case should not obscure the fact that it originates from a real and irreversible loss. Dana Ireland's death is the central event around which all subsequent developments revolve. This reality provides a grounding perspective, reminding us that the purpose of investigation and legal analysis is not only to understand what happened, but to respond to the consequences of that event in a meaningful way. As the case continues to be examined, it serves as a reminder that justice is not a static outcome, but an ongoing process. It involves the continuous evaluation of evidence, the willingness to revisit conclusions, and the recognition that understanding may evolve over time. This perspective does not diminish the importance of reaching decisions, but it acknowledges that those decisions exist within a broader context of uncertainty and change. In the final analysis, the Dana Ireland case stands as an enduring example of the complexities inherent in the pursuit of truth. It demonstrates that evidence, no matter how detailed, does not automatically produce clarity, and that interpretation is an essential but imperfect part of the process. It shows how legal systems strive to provide resolution while navigating uncertainty, and how those efforts can result in outcomes that are both definitive and open to question. The case does not offer a simple conclusion, but it provides a rich framework for understanding how complex cases evolve. It invites continued reflection on the relationship between evidence and interpretation, on the role of time in shaping understanding, and on the challenges of achieving justice in situations where certainty remains out of reach. Through this lens, the case continues to resonate, not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing inquiry into the nature of truth and the limits of what can be known. As the narrative of the Dana Ireland case approaches its furthest edge, it becomes increasingly clear that what remains is not a resolution in the traditional sense, but a sustained confrontation with uncertainty. The case does not close neatly, nor does it offer a final synthesis of facts that aligns all perspectives into a single, uncontested account. Instead, it leaves behind a structure composed of evidence, interpretation, legal action, and ongoing reflection, each element interacting with the others in a way that resists finality. This persistence is not simply a characteristic of the case, it is its defining feature. At the heart of this persistence lies the recognition that some questions cannot be answered completely, even after decades of investigation and analysis. The initial event, a violent encounter in a remote area, produced evidence that was real but incomplete. That incompleteness shaped every stage of the case, from the early investigation to the later application of forensic science and the subsequent legal proceedings. Each attempt to clarify the events added new information, but also revealed the limits of what could be known. The result is a case that expands with each examination, rather than narrowing toward a definitive conclusion. This expansion reflects the layered nature of understanding in complex cases. Each layer represents a different phase of analysis, influenced by the tools, knowledge, and context available at the time. The early investigation relied on physical observation and limited forensic capabilities. The later stages introduced DNA analysis and more advanced techniques. The legal proceedings added another layer, interpreting the evidence within the framework of law. And beyond all of this, ongoing public and academic discussion continues to reinterpret the case through new perspectives. These layers do not replace one another, they coexist, creating a multifaceted narrative that cannot be reduced to a single viewpoint. One of the most important insights that emerges from this structure is the distinction between resolution and understanding. Resolution implies a final answer, a point at which questions are settled and the case is closed. Understanding, on the other hand, is an ongoing process, one that evolves as new information and perspectives are introduced. In the Dana Ireland case, resolution has remained elusive, but understanding has deepened over time. The case is better understood now than it was in the immediate aftermath of the event, but that understanding does not eliminate all uncertainty. This distinction has significant implications for how justice is perceived. In many contexts, justice is associated with closure, the idea that a case will reach a point where all questions are answered and all responsibilities are clearly defined. The Dana Ireland case challenges this association by demonstrating that closure is not always achievable. The legal system can produce outcomes, such as convictions and sentences, but these outcomes do not necessarily resolve all underlying questions. Justice, in this context, becomes less about achieving perfect clarity and more about navigating uncertainty in a way that is as fair and informed as possible. The role of forensic science in this process is particularly complex. The introduction of DNA analysis was a turning point, providing a level of detail that had not been available during the initial investigation. However, as the case progressed, it became clear that scientific evidence does not exist in isolation. Its meaning depends on how it is interpreted and how it fits within the broader context of the case. In situations where that context is incomplete or contested, even highly advanced scientific methods cannot fully resolve uncertainty. This realization underscores the importance of integrating scientific findings with other forms of evidence, while also recognizing the limits of what those findings can establish. The legal proceedings in the case reflect these challenges. Trials and appeals are designed to evaluate evidence and reach decisions, but they operate within a system that requires conclusions even when uncertainty remains. This requirement can create a tension between the need for finality and the recognition of ambiguity. In the Dana Ireland case, this tension is evident in the progression of legal outcomes, from initial convictions to subsequent reviews and challenges. Each stage represents an attempt to reconcile the evidence with the standards of proof required by law, but none has fully resolved the broader questions surrounding the case. This ongoing process highlights the importance of critical engagement with evidence. Rather than accepting conclusions as fixed, the case encourages continuous examination and reevaluation. This approach does not undermine the legal system. Instead, it strengthens it by ensuring that decisions are subject to scrutiny and that new information can be incorporated as it becomes available. The Dana Ireland case serves as an example of how this process can unfold over time, demonstrating both its value and its complexity. Beyond the legal and scientific dimensions, the case also has a profound human impact. The loss of Dana Ireland is the central reality from which all other aspects of the case emerge. Her presence in Hawaii, her movement through the landscape, and the violence that ended her life are the foundation of the entire narrative. This human element provides a point of focus that remains constant, even as interpretations of the case evolve. It reminds us that behind every piece of evidence and every legal argument is a life that was interrupted and a loss that cannot be undone. The enduring nature of the case also speaks to the broader question of how societies remember and interpret unresolved events. Cases that lack clear conclusions often remain in public consciousness longer than those that are definitively resolved. They invite ongoing discussion, analysis, and reflection, becoming part of a collective effort to understand what cannot be easily explained. The Dana Ireland case occupies this space, serving as a reference point for discussions about forensic science, legal procedure, and the challenges of achieving justice in complex situations. In this sense, the case becomes more than an individual event. It becomes a lens through which broader issues can be examined. It raises questions about the reliability of evidence, the interpretation of scientific data, the functioning of the legal system, and the nature of truth itself. These questions extend beyond the specifics of the case, offering insights that are relevant to many areas of inquiry. The case does not provide definitive answers, but it encourages a deeper engagement with the processes through which answers are sought. As the narrative reaches its conclusion, what remains is not a sense of closure, but a recognition of the complexity that defines the case. The Dana Ireland case does not resolve into a single, clear story. Instead, it remains a collection of interconnected elements, each contributing to an understanding that is partial, evolving, and open to interpretation. This lack of finality is not a weakness. It is a reflection of the reality that some events cannot be fully reconstructed, and some questions cannot be completely answered. In the end, the significance of the case lies in its ability to reveal the limits of certainty and the importance of continued inquiry. It demonstrates that the pursuit of truth is an ongoing process, one that requires patience, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with complexity. It shows that justice, while essential, is not always synonymous with complete understanding, and that the two must often be pursued together, even when they do not fully align. The story of Dana Ireland, therefore, does not conclude with a final statement. It remains open not because it lacks meaning, but because its meaning continues to evolve. It is a reminder that some cases are not defined by their endings, but by the questions they leave behind and the ongoing effort to answer them. In the final stretch of reflection on the Dana Ireland case, what remains is not the comfort of resolution, but the weight of an enduring question. What does it mean to reach the limits of understanding and still continue searching for truth? This question does not emerge suddenly at the end of the narrative. It has been present from the beginning, embedded within the gaps of the evidence, the inconsistencies of interpretation, and the evolving nature of the legal process. Over time, however, it becomes more pronounced, transforming the case from a singular event into a broader meditation on the nature of justice itself. The case, when viewed in its entirety, resists the traditional structure of beginning, middle, and end. It begins with a clear and tragic event, but as it progresses, the narrative does not narrow toward a single conclusion. Instead, it expands, incorporating new layers of analysis and interpretation that complicate rather than simplify the overall picture. This expansion is not a failure of the investigative or legal process, but a reflection of the inherent complexity of a case. It demonstrates that some events cannot be fully contained within a single narrative, no matter how detailed or carefully constructed that narrative may be. At the center of this complexity is the relationship between evidence and meaning. Evidence provides the foundation for understanding, but it does not determine meaning on its own. Meaning is constructed through interpretation, and interpretation is influenced by context, perspective, and the tools available at a given time. In the Dana Ireland case, this process of construction has been ongoing, with each phase of analysis contributing to a deeper but not necessarily more definitive understanding of what occurred. The introduction of DNA analysis marked a pivotal moment in this process, offering a new way to connect individuals to the physical evidence of the crime. Yet even this powerful tool did not resolve the case completely. Instead, it highlighted the distinction between identifying a connection and explaining its significance. The presence of genetic material can indicate involvement, but it does not, by itself, establish the sequence of events or the intentions behind them. These aspects must still be inferred, and inferences are inherently subject to debate. This debate is evident in the legal proceedings that followed the introduction of forensic evidence. The courtroom became a space where different interpretations of the same evidence were presented and contested. Each side sought to construct a narrative that aligned with its understanding of the case, using the available evidence to support its position. The outcome of this process was a set of legal decisions that reflected the balance of these competing interpretations, but those decisions did not eliminate the underlying disagreements. The persistence of these disagreements underscores the distinction between legal resolution and broader acceptance. A court can reach a verdict, but that verdict does not necessarily resolve all questions or satisfy all perspectives. In the Dana Ireland case, the legal outcomes have been accompanied by ongoing debate, reflecting the complexity of the evidence and the difficulty of achieving consensus in situations where uncertainty remains. This dynamic illustrates how justice as a legal process can operate effectively while still leaving space for continued inquiry and reflection. Beyond the courtroom, the case is taken on a life of its own as a subject of public and academic discussion. It is often referenced in conversations about the reliability of forensic evidence, the possibility of wrongful convictions, and the challenges of investigating crimes in remote or isolated environments. These discussions extend the impact of the case beyond its immediate context, turning it into a point of reference for broader issues within the criminal justice system. In this way, the case continues to influence how similar situations are approached and understood. One of the most significant lessons that emerges from this extended reflection is the importance of humility in the face of complexity. The Dana Ireland case demonstrates that even with advanced tools and thorough investigation, there are limits to what can be known. Recognizing these limits does not diminish the value of the investigative or legal process. Rather, it emphasizes the need for careful and thoughtful engagement with evidence. It encourages a mindset that is open to revision and attentive to the possibility of error, even in the presence of strong indications. This mindset is particularly important in cases where the stakes are high and the consequences of error are significant. The possibility of wrongful conviction, raised in the context of the case, serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice must be balanced with the need for accuracy. Achieving this balance requires not only reliable evidence, but also a willingness to question assumptions and to revisit conclusions when necessary. The Dana Ireland case illustrates how this process can unfold over time, highlighting both its challenges and its importance. At the same time, the case reinforces the central role of the individual whose life was lost. Dana Ireland is not simply a name associated with a legal case. She is the person whose experience and death form the basis of the entire narrative. Her presence grounds the case in reality, providing a constant reminder of what is at stake. While the analysis of evidence and the discussion of legal principles are essential, they must always be connected to this human dimension. Without it, the case risks becoming an abstract exercise rather than a response to a real and irreversible loss. As the narrative reaches its conclusion, it becomes clear that the Dana Ireland case does not offer a final answer, but rather a continuing question. It asks how truth can be approached when evidence is incomplete, how justice can be pursued when certainty is limited, and how systems can adapt to incorporate new information while maintaining fairness. These questions do not have simple or definitive answers, but they are essential for understanding the nature of complex cases and the processes used to address them. The enduring significance of the case lies in its ability to provoke these questions and to sustain engagement with them over time. It does not provide closure, but it offers insight. It does not resolve all uncertainties, but it illuminates the conditions under which those uncertainties arise. In doing so, it contributes to a broader understanding of how truth and justice are pursued in the real world, where clarity is often partial and conclusions are subject to revision. In the end, the Dana Ireland case stands as a testament to the complexity of human events and the systems designed to interpret them. It shows that the search for truth is not always a linear process, and that the path to justice can be shaped by factors that extend far beyond the immediate facts of a case. It reminds us that understanding is an ongoing endeavor, one that requires patience, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with uncertainty. Rather than closing the story, this final reflection leaves it open, not as an unfinished narrative, but as a continuing exploration. The case remains a point of reference, a source of insight, and a reminder of the challenges inherent in seeking truth in a complex world. It is not defined by its ending, but by its persistence, and by the questions it continues to raise long after the events themselves have passed into history.